How can I introduce President Hackney? Everybody knows him, knows what he has done, and his great accomplishments. I would like to have one or two private reminiscences. I was fortunate to be near the center of action when Hackney came on campus as president. I knew we had a winner when he moved into the president's house and said the best thing about it was close to Baskin-Robbins. And I can testify that he took advantage of that fact. Now, you're all aware, everybody is aware, of Sheldon Hackney's great accomplishments as an academic leader and a government leader. Okay? There's no reason to go through that or dwell on it, except that there is one item that is my favorite and for which we owe Sheldon Hackney a great vote of thanks, in that he was able to orchestrate and organize the university in such a way that prior to his presidency, Penn was not well recognized as an undergraduate school. Not before his presidency was over, we were in the top dozen. And of all the things he's done for Penn, that is my very favorite. But today's event will have very little, essentially nothing, to do with his administrative life or life of leadership and service. Instead, today we want to point out that among his other talents, Hackney is an accomplished historian and a great scholar. Throughout his lifetime, if I counted up correctly, he spent about 18 years or so as a full-time professor that did teaching and research and scholarship. About a third or close to half at the beginning of his career and the rest towards the end. So we have to regard him as a faculty member who has had a fine period of scholarly work interrupted by an interregnum in which he got interested in some other things that for today are not of great interest to us. As I looked at the works that he published, I was struck by several things. First of all, there was a constant theme in it, and that theme was the rights of the individual and the nature of liberty and freedom. As a historian of the American South, he was deeply involved in these issues, contributed greatly to understanding them, and showed how the United States was a meld of some very contradictory ideas. His latest book, called Magnolias Without Moonlight, has a last chapter in it called Shades of Freedom in America, and I assume that that's where he got the title for today's talk. There is one other factor that is never explicit in his work, but came through to me, which was that he understands and has a deep insight into the contradictions in the nature of the United States psyche and into the difficulties we've had, and he seems to know the history, the good parts, warts and all. But still what comes through is he is convinced, I see in his work, that the United States, with its founding principles based on individual rights and freedom, have been a great transforming force for the world and continues to be so. Well, I think I've said enough to show you that we honor today Sheldon Hackney as a scholar and historian, which in my view is at least of equal weight as his great accomplishments in leadership.
Thank you very much, Lou. It is great to be here back on the campus of Penn, an institution that is in my blood and in my heart and will never go away. And it's nice to see so many old friends. I shouldn't say it that way, should I? long-term friends, and to be here with you. It probably is even more of a compliment to have Lou say that I'm really a faculty member and not an administrator. When I first got involved in full-time administration, my PhD advisor, close friend, C. Vann Woodward, was horrified. He was very disappointed. He thought he'd wasted all of his time. Now, I am at the moment writing a biography of him, so I'll get my revenge of some sort. But it is good to be with you, and I have been interested in American national character for some time, and I thought I'd talk to you a bit about that today. And there are contradictions in it, so I hope it's not too confusing. But you probably have been following events in the Near East, as I have. I'm thinking here of Egypt and in particular, but also Libya and Syria, Tunisia, the general upheaval in the Muslim world, in which comes from individuals apparently working with each other, and what comes through in the television clips that we see is a great deal of talk about democracy and their desire for democracy. And I detect in the Americans with whom I talk about this a heightened sense of interest. It's not just that these events in the Middle East may end up making us more strategically secure in the world, but it is that they are about democracy in some sense, self-rule. And Americans have for a long time thought that was that's who we are, basically. We're about democracy. Now, that doesn't solve the problem, but it's true. Now, I was also on the road between Philly and Martha's Vineyard on the day after Election Day in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected president, and I was surprised to hear on the talk radio, on the NPR that morning, so many ordinary Americans, and I'm not using that term derogatorily, but people who are not celebrities, but ordinary Americans expressing their pleasure that Barack Obama had been elected, even some who had voted Republican. But they were pleased because they thought that his election it was taking another step toward the United States achieving its ideals, and they are there. Now, American exceptionalism, which is a term and a concept that was first enunciated in 1835 by Alexis de Tocqueville in his book about who America was at that time after his long tour of the United States. His book was entitled Democracy in America. But that exceptionalism, the sense that Americans and America is different, that we, well, one version of that is that we don't do anything wrong. Other states make errors and do bad things. We don't. The other sense of American exceptionalism is that we are a country unlike other countries that has a purpose. And that purpose is there. I must say that even though American exceptionalism is a dangerous concept, I took a good bit of pleasure that I heard that sense from ordinary Americans that we do have a purpose in life or a set of ideals that we should share. If we think about who we are, one way to start doing that is to think of some kind of image, if you will, a symbol that would represent America. And as I do that, I think first of large sailing vessels that took Europeans from Europe and brought them to these shores, followed by perhaps covered wagons going west, taking Americans to the west, followed perhaps by automobiles, so Americans riding in automobiles because we were very big in that industry right away, followed maybe by the image of an airplane flying, covering a lot of territory, going somewhere, followed by spaceships exploring space and going to the moon, for instance. All of those things are things that Americans would typically think of when looking for a symbol of the United States, because they're all images of motion, if you will. And that is to say that we are going somewhere, but we are not there yet. And that we're still becoming. And that is, I think, true, and we'll explore that a little bit. If you also think about terms that are frequently used to describe Americans, their personalities and their character, you will find some interesting things. We think of Americans as being quite materialistic, quite pragmatic, if you will, practical. We're interested in earning our livings and living a good life that's based on our material circumstances. Yet we are also the most religious country in the developed world. More church memberships, more church attendance than any others. We also frequently think of Americans as being selfish, self-interested. That's the way we get ahead. That's the way our economy works. Everybody pursues his own self-interest, and that will produce a higher degree of economic activity, and that's good for everybody. But it's also true that modern-day philanthropy was invented in the United States in the 19th century when our first moguls had made great fortunes. They started giving it away, and philanthropic organizations were founded. We think of America as being the land of the common man. We are very much committed to making sure ordinary people do well. At the same time, we're fascinated by celebrities. We just go crazy to see someone who we see on television. We believe in hard work. If you work hard, you'll do okay in life. But we also are fascinated with schemes to get rich quick. And our society, our economy, in fact, is full of instant coffee, instant everything you can think of, instant marriages, instant divorces, it goes on and on. Instant everything. We are optimistic, maybe to a fault, yet the Jeremiad is also very American. And if you've been listening to the news lately, you will have heard a good bit of those Jeremiads directed at our economy currently. We are pragmatic, yet this is the country where there have been more utopias founded in existence than any other country in the world, including not only the 19th century when they were legion in America, but also during the counterculture of the late 1960s and the 1970s. We like utopias, including perhaps our nation itself. We believe that the lonely hero is someone to admire. Indeed, in Hollywood, our great contribution to filmmaking in the world is the Western, which typically, or frequently anyway, is focused on a lonely hero who is out on the plains riding a horse and defending people who need defending by himself, fighting great odds. That's there. But you also realize that the thing that we have done extraordinarily well is to build large organizations, big corporations, armies, navies, and all that. We're very good at huge organizations. So it's all there. But these are examples of how you get stuck with a conversation between binary opponents when you start thinking about particular characteristics that are typical of Americans. Conversations between binary opponents. That's not bad. Those could be liberty and equality, both of which we tend to set as our goals. But if you have a lot of liberty, you'll soon have a lot of inequality. So in some senses, they are in opposition, yet they're there. Freedom, indeed, I think, is the most powerful word in the American vocabulary. It's there in the Declaration of Independence at the outset of our life as a nation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And in the preamble to the Constitution, a few years later, We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. It's there. I also think of a phrase called the Empire of Liberty, which was first used by Thomas Jefferson in 1780 during the Revolution when he was writing a letter to George Rogers Clark, a friend and an official. And that is really quite powerful. And then later, when Jefferson was President of the United States, he sent the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the Louisiana Territory that had just been acquired, and he called that expedition a search for the Empire of Liberty. So yes, we were extending our empire, if you will, but it was going to be an empire of liberty. Then there's my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty. Of thee I sing, land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside let freedom ring. The Pledge of Allegiance to the flag, which was first established in the 1890s, is there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. The under God phrase was added in the 1950s, if you will, but the rest is there. Liberty and justice for all, in particular. That's there. There is the great address of Abraham Lincoln at Gettysburg on November 19th, 1863. This is when he was dedicating the cemetery there. It's a marvelous address. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Woodrow Wilson, when he was president, had a platform of a set of progressive measures that were going to help to control the rapid growth of large corporations in the economy and do some other things. And he called that platform, his program, The New Freedom. FDR, on the eve of World War II, before we were actually in the war, this is in January of 1941, before we were actually in the war, but after we were supporting vigorously the efforts of England and even France to resist the German offensive. And those four freedoms are quite clear in FDR's speech on that occasion. He said, in the future days, which we seek to make secure, we look forward to a world founded upon four essential human freedoms. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understandings which will secure to every nation a healthy peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world. Then, of course, there is Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech at the end of the March on Washington in August 28, 1963, when he stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and gave a wonderful address, and the peroration at the end is this. And when this happens, when we allow freedom to ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last. So perhaps we ought to think of freedom as our national purpose. That doesn't solve the problem, though it's a start in that direction, because freedom has a lot of different meanings. And in fact, scholars have identified 200 different meanings for the word freedom. And that doesn't include Janis Joplin's definition, which is freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. You probably remember Janis Joplin. You're lucky that I'm not singing this for you, but there it is. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. Flipping back, way back to the early 17th century when Massachusetts was being founded, John Winthrop was a leader of that group of Puritans who came from England to establish a colony where they could worship as they wished to. And that is an occasion or a time when freedom meant freedom for the group, because the individual freedoms weren't expanded much by that move to Massachusetts, but they were able to set up churches and profess faith the way they wanted to do it, not the way that the Anglican Church wanted to do it. Well, there in John Winthrop's notion of this, when he was giving a talk to the Massachusetts General Court in 1645, he said that there is a covenant between God and man, so there is liberty to that only which is good, just, and honest. This liberty is maintained and exercised in a way of subjection to authority. It is the same kind of liberty wherewith Christ has made us free. That is, if we keep free from sin, we will be free from death as well, in a sense. But you have to obey authority in this term. Well, that's one definition, but we move on from there. William Penn, here in this state, in the 1680s and 1690s, was frequently at odds with the local government. He was controlling things through a set of men that he appointed, and there was a lot of friction between what the local settlers wanted to do and what William Penn told them to do. And that led eventually to William Penn deciding that it wasn't worth it, so he issued in 1701 the Charter of Privileges, it was called then, and it was really a charter that gave self-rule, home rule, to the colony of Pennsylvania. On the 50th anniversary of that Charter of Privileges, you know what the Jubilee year is. The Jubilee year is after 49 years, the next year is the Jubilee year, according to the Bible. So in the Jubilee year of the Charter of Privileges, 1751, the legislature in Pennsylvania had a bell made in England, actually, and shipped here, but it was a bell that was to recognize the importance of this Charter of Privileges. And on that bell was inscribed a quotation from the Bible, from Leviticus 25:10, which reads, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." Now, that bell went through some problems, physical problems, but was kept and still is in existence. You can go down and see it now. It was rung on special occasions, and public occasions, and it was rung with great enthusiasm in July 1776 to call people to the first big public reading of the Declaration of Independence. Then in the 1830s, when the abolition of slavery movement got going very vigorously, it was revved up again. It had been going for some time, but in the 1830s it really got going, and there were pamphlets being issued, newspapers being circulated, and the symbol that the abolitionists were using was this bell, and they began to call it the Liberty Bell. and that's where the term comes from. Also from the quotation on it, proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. So we are moving here in the revolutionary period from subjects to citizens. Our founding documents link freedom and equality in their wording of all of our principles and ways of government. But the Naturalization Act of 1790, one of the first acts of the new government, 1790, actually racialized citizenship. It said that white men could become citizens of this country, not women, not African Americans, not people from other races and ethnic groups, but white men. Women also had an inferior position in society at that time, and in this society as well. There was the Chinese Exclusion Act passed in 1882, which says no Chinese can be admitted to the country. That was repealed in World War II when China was our ally. Then, after the turn of the 20th century, when Theodore Roosevelt was president, he worked out, and there was a great anti-immigration movement then, especially directed at Japan, but Teddy Roosevelt didn't quite like the idea of a law saying people from a particular place couldn't come in. So Roosevelt worked out a gentleman's agreement, as it was called, with Japan, in which the Japanese government said that they would limit the number of Japanese who were immigrating to the United States if the United States would not pass that Exclusion Act, and that was there. There was indeed a great shift of American attitudes towards immigration in the late 19th century because the source of immigration shifted from Northern and Western Europe to Eastern and Southern Europe, and people of English background and others did not like Eastern European people and Southern European people. So there was an anti-immigration movement that started with great fervor and grew through the late 19th century and early 20th century, leading to the National Origins Quota Act in 1921, and it was revised in 1924, which limited the number of people from each country who could come. In fact, it used the percentage of the American population that came from that particular country in 1890 as a guide to the limit, the percentage limit on how many immigrants could come from that country. That remained in effect until 1965, in fact, when in the midst of the civil rights movement and all the other democratic movements of that decade, the Immigration Act of 1965 did away with using ethnic origin, racial origins for immigration quotas at all. So we have, therefore, to cope with the gaps between creed and reality in our history. The gaps are there. Slavery, something that we can't be proud of at all. The genocide of Native Americans. Anti-Catholicism that has been very strong in this country at various times. Nativism in general. Anti-Semitism. Xenophobia in general. Anti-Asian feelings. Wage slavery. And I would add also the Red Scare of 1919, 1920, and McCarthyism in the 1950s as being a phenomena that don't sit well with our belief in liberty and equality and democracy. The struggle for equal citizenship for African Americans has been a big theme in our history, especially in the 1950s and 60s, and currently as well. It is there, and it has made great progress, but we're not there yet, of course. There's also the counterculture that came after the civil rights movement was losing momentum in the late 1960s and then in the 1970s, when people began, young people in particular, began to ask of each other, why don't you become the person that you want to be? Why don't you remake yourself? Don't pay attention to all these pressures on you, pushing you in one direction or another. reinvent yourself. So the freedom of self-invention is there. It's a bit like the frontier. It's a bit like going through therapy. It's a bit like buying an identity, but you make yourself whoever you really want to be. There is, I think, let me read you a little bit of a poem by Langston Hughes that takes off on this point. Langston Hughes, of course, was a great figure in the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s. This particular poem he wrote in the 1930s during the Great Depression, and I won't read all of it because it's wonderful. And we have a challenge here. I will try to indicate when Langston Hughes is writing sort of in the abstract as a poet, and when he is speaking as himself, as an individual. But maybe you can pick this up as well. I'll wave my hand when he's speaking for himself. Let America be America again. Let it be the dream it used to be. Let it be the pioneer on the plain seeking a home where he himself is free. America never was America for me. Oh, let my land be a land where liberty is crowned with no false patriotic wreath, but opportunity is real and life is free. Equality is in the air we breathe. There's never been equality for me, nor freedom in this homeland of the free. Say who are you that mumbles in the dark, and who are you that draws your veil across the stars? I am the poor white, fooled and pushed apart. I am the Negro bearing slavery's scars. I am the red man driven from the land. I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak. And he goes on, oh, let America be America again, the land that never has been yet, and yet must be, the land where every man is free, the land that's mine, the poor man's, Indians, Negroes, me, who made America, whose sweat and blood, whose faith and pain, whose hand at the foundry, whose plow in the rain, must bring back our mighty dream again. Oh, yes, I say it plain, America never was America for me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be. Out of the rack and ruin of our gangster death, the rape and rot of graft and stealth and lies, we the people must redeem the land, the mines, the plants, the rivers, the mountains and the endless plain, all the stretch of these great green states, and make America again. That's Langston Hughes really commenting on the fact that we don't live up to our ideals. And we need to be constantly aware of that and constantly trying to live up to those ideals. All of this is to say that historically we have argued over what liberty means and who should enjoy its blessings. Those struggles were made inevitable by the very fact that liberty has been at the core of our self-image from the birth of the nation to the present. A prize so precious is bound to attract suitors and protectors, both noble and profane. We have therefore thought of liberty as freedom from sin, the kind of freedom which is to be achieved through perfect obedience to some authority's interpretation of God's word, personal independence, which can be secured by owning property, freedom from chattel slavery, the absence of wage slavery, the ability to reinvent oneself, freedom from discrimination because of one's group identity, participation in self-government, and countless other definitions. As a society, we have learned how to hold in dynamic tension the notion that liberty has to do with the absence of governmental constraints and the progressive era idea that in a complex and interconnected society with vast powers over the individual wielded by distant people and invisible people, the government must act in positive ways that should help the individual to free himself to achieve self-realization. A constant theme throughout has been the need for ordered liberty. America the beautiful, God shed his grace on thee, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty in law. Or, as the eminent jurist Learned Hand put it in 1944 in his address, The Spirit of Liberty, when addressing the question, what is liberty, he wrote, "It is not the ruthless, the unbridled will. It is not freedom to do as one likes. That is the denial of liberty and leads straight to its overthrow. A society in which men recognize no check upon their freedom soon becomes a society where freedom is the possession of only a savage few." George Soros, our billionaire local figure who is something of a progressive, put it differently. He said, "Unregulated markets do not breed democracy, they breed thugs." Isaiah Berlin, the great scholar, put it a bit more elegantly. Both liberty and equality are among the primary goals pursued by human beings through many centuries, but total liberty for wolves is death to the lambs. Total liberty of the powerful, the gifted, is not compatible with the rights to a decent existence of the weak and the less gifted. So a constant worry through these centuries of freedom is that it would degrade into some form of uncivilized society. Thus, 18th century commentators worried that liberty would undermine the authority that they assumed was necessary in order to keep order. Theodore Adorno and other social scientists in the 20th century who were trying to figure out what totalitarianism was and why people accepted totalitarianism, theorized that freedom breeds such feelings of insecurity and anxiety that many will seek security and submission to some strong authority. Those folks would be known as authoritarian personalities. In 200 years, the American people progressed from worrying that too much freedom would lead to anarchic disorder to fearing that too much freedom would lead to regimentation. I think it's both wonderful and worrisome that freedom is so variegated in its meanings and so powerful in its appeal. It tells us who we are, and it reminds us of whom we must not become. It gives Americans a standard by which we can measure the worth of proposed policies, and it allows our leaders to mobilize support for actions that require sacrifice but promise to bring benefits in the long run. At the same time, it also allows our leaders to mask less altruistic motives, to lead us in directions in which we should not be going. The task of the citizen then is to discern the difference between those two rhetorical uses of the idea of freedom. It depends on an alert and healthy democracy. If citizens fail in that task, freedom will fail. Liberty, in short, is a communal enterprise. Whatever it means, whether it is the absence of governmental or social intrusion into the space in which the individual is autonomous, think freedom from, or it is maybe the availability of governmental or social support to overcome barriers like poverty or ignorance, freedom to. Well, whether it is either one of those things, it depends on the active commitment of the members of society. If liberty is not cherished and nurtured by the community to which we belong, so that it is expressed in the laws that apply to everyone equally, and if it does not include all citizens alike, it will soon not exist for any but the fiercest animals in the urbanized jungle. Furthermore, since liberty changes its meaning from time to time and place to place, it will always be an unfinished matter, always contingent, forever in need of being remolded by our very selves to defend against new threats, but also to take advantage of new opportunities for each civic participant. So I wish you all the joys of freedom as you go forward into the world. Thank you very much.
And then we have something for you. And this was, we were able to get this for you through the cooperation of the chairman of the board of the Pennsylvania Historical Society. And because we're a poor organization, we couldn't afford to get what we want, which was what the original was. But we do have a copy here for you of an original which can be found at the Pennsylvania Historical Society. And here it is.
Oh, this is College Hall in the early days. It's terrific. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
We understood from the Pennsylvania Historical Society that was called the first building, and it was from 1888.
Yeah.
So we hope that it will remind you of your days, not then, and that you enjoy it. It comes with our deep affection and thanks.
Well,
And
let me point out that in this picture of College Hall, the towers are still there. They were taken off later. I was one of those.